The Way In, Season 2, Episode 1, Behind the Curtain. Chapter 1. The Quiet. It's quiet. That's the first thing Nathaniel says when he wakes up. Not where am I? Not what did you do? Not even my name. Just that. It's quiet. He says it like he's noticing something missing from the room. Like a hum that's been there his entire life has finally stopped, and he doesn't know what to replace it with. I'm standing across from him when it happens, far enough that he can't reach me even if he tried. Close enough that I can see the exact moment realization settles in behind his eyes. He tests it, not physically, not with movement, internally. I can see it in the way his focus shifts. Not to me, not to Carver, not to my father, but somewhere past us. Somewhere that used to exist and doesn't anymore. Nothing answers him. Carver finishes tightening the bandage around his shoulder and steps back without saying anything. The bleeding has slowed, but not stopped. Nathaniel doesn't react to the pain the way he should. Or maybe he does. And it just doesn't matter compared to whatever else he's trying to feel. And can't. My father hasn't moved from the door. Rifle still in his hands. Not raised, but ready. Watching Nathaniel the way he used to watch suspects across interrogation tables. Waiting for the moment where behavior slips and truth shows through. Nathaniel lowers his head slightly, then lifts it again, like he's trying to reset something that won't respond. It's gone, he says. No one answers him. Because we all know what he means. I feel it too. Not directly. Not the way he does. But the absence is there in a different way. Like pressure that used to sit just behind my thoughts has released without warning, leaving something open that hasn't decided what it is yet. Nathaniel's eyes shift to me. That's the first real contact. You can still feel it, he says. It's not a question. I don't answer. Carver steps slightly to the side, putting himself between us without making it obvious. It's a small movement, but it changes the room. We're not doing this yet, he says. Nathaniel doesn't look at him. You don't even know what you did, he says to me. My father finally moves, 2 steps forward. Enough to close distance if he needs to, not enough to escalate anything unnecessarily. That's enough, he says. His voice is steady, familiar, controlled in a way that grounds the space whether anything in it deserves grounding or not. Nathaniel shifts his attention to him, studies him. There's something different in that look now. Before, when he looked at my father, there was always a second layer behind it. Evaluation, access, intention, waiting just beneath the surface. Now it's just observation, human, limited. You don't understand this either, Nathaniel says. My father doesn't react. Then explain it, he says. Simple, direct. The way he's always handled things that don't make sense. Nathaniel almost smiles, not with humor, with recognition. You think this works like the rest of your cases, he says. Question, answer, resolution. Carver cuts in. It works, however we decide it works. That pulls Nathaniel's attention away from both of us. Finally, he looks at Carver, really looks at him. Something shifts again. You should have stayed where you were, Nathaniel says quietly. Carver doesn't take the bait. That's not your concern anymore. Nathaniel leans back slightly in the chair, testing the restraints without making it obvious. They hold. Everything holds, except whatever used to exist behind his eyes. He exhales once. Slow, controlled. Then he says it again, softer this time. It's quiet. And for the first time since we brought him down off the mountain, I realized something I hadn't let myself consider before. We didn't just stop him. We changed him. And none of us know what that means yet. Chapter 2. Static. We don't move him right away. We have no plan beyond the moment we find ourselves in. We are uncertain what steps to take next, even if no one says it out loud. The cabin still feels like the only place where this makes sense, even though it's also the place where everything went wrong. The walls hold the memory of it. The floor still carries the weight of what happened the night before. It's contained in a way the outside world isn't. Isolation feels safer. Carver disagrees. We shouldn't stay here longer than we have to, he says, checking the bandage again. We're exposed. No communication. No support. My father doesn't respond immediately. He's watching Nathaniel instead, measuring him the way he used to measure people who were trying to decide what version of themselves to present. He's not going anywhere, he says finally. Nathaniel lets out a quiet breath that might be a laugh. You're sure about that? Carver doesn't look up. You want to try something? There's no challenge in his voice, just fact. Nathaniel doesn't move, because he knows he can't. And that might be the most dangerous part of all of this. Before, we were reacting to something we didn't understand. Now we're holding it in a chair, pretending that makes it manageable. I step closer without meaning to. Not close enough to touch him. Not close enough to risk anything. Just close enough to see the difference more clearly. It's the way he tracks movement now. Before, when someone shifted in the room, he didn't follow it with his eyes. He didn't need to. He already knew where everyone was, what they were doing, what they were thinking about doing. Now, he watches like everyone else. A fraction too slow, a fraction too late. You're looking for it, I say, before I can stop myself. Nathaniel's gaze snaps to me. Of course I am. Why? That question feels more important than anything Carver's asked so far. Nathaniel studies me for a long moment before answering. Because it was part of me, he says. Or I thought it was. There's something almost honest in that. Not manipulation, not strategy. Confusion. Carver straightens. That's not what we're here for, he says. We're not figuring out your identity crisis. Nathaniel doesn't react to that either. He just keeps looking at me. You felt it, he says. When you took it. I shake my head slightly. No. A pause. Not like you think. That's the truth, even if I don't fully understand it. What I felt wasn't something I could name. It wasn't power or control, just resistance. And then complete absence. Nathaniel leans forward as much as the restraints allow. Then you don't understand what you removed. Carver steps in again. That's enough. Nathaniel finally looks away from me. Good. But the space between us doesn't settle. If anything, it sharpens. Because now there's a question sitting in the room that no one wants to answer. Not what he was, not what I did, but what happens next. My father shifts his grip on the rifle slightly. Old habit. Grounding motion. We need to decide what we're doing with him, he says. Carver nods. Finally, something clear. Agreed. Nathaniel closes his eyes for a moment, like he's listening to something that isn't there anymore. When he opens them again, he doesn't look at any of us. "You don't have as much time as you think," he says. That pulls all three of us back to him. Carver's voice is flat. "Why?" Nathaniel doesn't answer right away, and when he does, it's not direct. "It doesn't stop because I'm here." Silence settles in the cabin again, but it's not the same kind as before. This one isn't empty. It's waiting. Chapter 3, The Decision. Nathaniel's words don't fade after he says them. They settle into the space like a breeze through an open door, not loud or dramatic, just present in a way that forces everything else to adjust around it. "It doesn't stop because I'm here." The sentence reshapes the room without asking permission. Carver is the first to move, stepping away from Nathaniel without fully turning his back, creating distance while keeping him in his peripheral vision. It's controlled, deliberate, the kind of movement that signals a shift from reaction to process. He clears space at the table again, the same way he did before we went up the mountain. Repeating the motion like structure might still apply if he builds it carefully enough. My father doesn't follow him immediately. He stays where he is for a moment longer, studying Nathaniel with a focus that has nothing to do with curiosity and everything to do with pattern recognition. Then he sets the rifle against the wall within reach, not abandoning it, just redefining its role. That small shift matters. It means he's stepping out of immediate threat response and into something closer to decision-making, where instinct has to share space with consequence. When he finally speaks, his voice carries the weight of years spent believing that problems move through systems, whether people understand them or not. "Seems simple enough," he says, though nothing about this is simple anymore. "We take him down, turn him over, and let this become someone else's problem." It should make sense. It doesn't. The logic is intact, but something underneath it feels outdated, like applying rules that were written for a different kind of world. Carver doesn't respond right away, and that hesitation is more telling than agreement would be. He knows the system. He trusts it more than I do. But even he understands that what we're dealing with doesn't fit neatly inside it. "No," I say, before I can talk myself out of it. Both of them look at me, not surprised exactly, but waiting to see if I have something solid enough to stand behind. I don't raise my voice. I don't need to. The room is already quiet enough that anything said with certainty carries. The second we do that, we lose control of what happens to him, I continue, forcing the thought into something clear enough to hold. And we lose access to anything he knows. Carver exhales slowly, tension bleeding through in a way he usually keeps contained. "That's not our job," he says, but there's less conviction in it than there should be. "Our job is to contain the threat and hand it off." "And what if the system you're handing it to already knows about this?" I ask. "What if they've been part of it longer than we have?" That's where it shifts. Not dramatically, just enough. My father's posture changes slightly, weight settling in a way that tells me he's not hearing this as theory anymore. He's searching his own memory now, not for answers, but for alignment. "You're saying this isn't isolated," he says. "I'm saying we don't know who else is part of this," I reply, and that uncertainty carries more weight than certainty would. Carver glances back toward Nathaniel, still in the chair, still watching without speaking, his presence now less threatening in an obvious way, but somehow more complicated because of it. "You think he's part of something bigger," Carver says. I think he already told us he is. No one argues that, because they heard it too. Carver runs a hand along the back of his neck, grounding himself in something physical before continuing. No service, no backup, no verification until we get off this mountain, he says, outlining the problem in terms he can control. And once we do, I say, we don't get to decide who sees him first. My father looks between us, the conflict settling into something he recognizes even if the details don't match anything he's dealt with before. You're asking him to ignore procedure, he says. I'm asking him to consider that procedure might not apply here. That lands differently, not as defiance, but as possibility. Carver finally makes the decision, or at least the version of one we can live with for now. If we keep him, we do it on our terms, he says. And my father nods slowly because that language translates. I look back at Nathaniel, who hasn't missed a single word. Careful, he says quietly, not as a warning, but as an observation. We don't respond. The decision has already been made, and it changes everything. Now it's time to pull my dad out from the dark and fill him in finally. Chapter 4. Telling my father. There are versions of the truth you tell to protect people, and there are versions you tell because protection is no longer possible. I don't try to soften anything when I explain it to my father. Not because I don't want to, but because there isn't a version of this that becomes easier to accept if I rearrange the order of it. We step outside the cabin to do it, not for privacy, but for space. The air is colder than it should be for how long the sun has been up, and the mountains sit in that still, watchful way that makes everything human feel smaller than it is. He listens without interrupting, which is how I know he's taking it seriously. If he thought any part of this was exaggeration or panic, he'd stop me, redirect, force it into something more familiar. He doesn't. I tell him about Nathaniel, about the way he entered people, about what he did to me, about the way it changed the way I think, the way I perceive space and attention and intention. I tell him about Carver's cases, about the pattern that existed before we ever put a name to it, about the fact that what happened on the mountain wasn't an ending, just a path toward something we don't fully understand yet. When I tell him what I did, what I think I did, he doesn't react the way I expect. He doesn't ask if I'm sure. He doesn't question whether it's possible. He focuses on the consequence instead of the mechanism, which is the most dad detective-like response there is. So he can't do it anymore, he says. That's what it looks like. And you can? He asks. It's not an accusation. It's a clarification. I think so, I say. And that uncertainty sits heavier than anything else I've told him. He looks past me for a moment, out toward the tree line where the trail disappears back into the woods we came down from. I can see him placing this against everything he's seen before, testing it against cases that didn't make sense at the time, against instincts he might have ignored because they didn't fit the evidence he had. I had a guy once, he says after a moment, his voice quieter now. Came in on a domestic. Nothing unusual on paper. No history, no escalation. Neighbors said he just changed. One night he was calm. Next night he wasn't the same person. Not angry, not drunk. Just off. Like something else was driving him and he couldn't catch up to it. He pauses. Not for effect, but because he's deciding how much of this he trusts himself to say out loud. We booked him, ran the process. Next morning, he's sitting in the holding room acting like he doesn't remember any of it. Not in a convenient way, in a way that felt wrong, like the memory wasn't there to begin with. I don't say anything. I don't need to. The file got pulled, he continues. Not by me. Not by anyone in the department. Just gone. Federal interest, that's what we were told. Happens sometimes. You don't ask questions if you want to keep your job. He looks back at me then, really looks, like he's seeing me in the context of that memory for the first time. You're telling me that wasn't random, he says. I'm telling you it might not have been. He nods slowly, the kind of nod that doesn't signal agreement so much as acceptance of a new variable that can't be ignored. And now we've got one of them in a chair inside that cabin, he says. Yes. And you think turning him in might put him right back into the hands of whoever pulled that file. I think it might, I say. Or worse, make him disappear before we understand anything. He lets that sit for a moment, then exhales through his nose, a familiar sound that used to mean he'd reached a decision he didn't like, but was going to stand behind anyway. Then we don't hand him over, he says. It's that simple for him once the line is crossed. But if we're doing this, he adds, his tone shifting back into something structured and controlled, we do it clean, no guessing, no improvising where it matters. I nod. Agreed. He studies me for one more second, something protective surfacing behind everything else, not as doubt, but as recalibration. The world just got bigger in a direction he didn't choose, and I'm already standing further into it than he is. Whatever you did up there, he says, not asking for details, just acknowledging it. We'll figure that part out later. That's as close as he gets to concern. We turn back toward the cabin together, not because we're ready, but because waiting doesn't change anything. Inside, Nathaniel is still exactly where we left him, which somehow makes everything feel less stable, not more. Chapter 5. Interrogation. We don't call it that out loud, but that's what it becomes the moment we step back inside and close the door behind us. The air hasn't changed, but the purpose has. Before, we were reacting to him. Now we're choosing to engage, and that difference carries weight, whether we acknowledge it or not. Carver takes the lead without announcing it, pulling a chair across from Nathaniel and sitting in a way that closes distance without giving up control. My father stays off to the side, not disengaged, just positioned to observe instead of direct. I don't sit. I stay standing, slightly behind Carver's line of sight, where I can see both of them without being the center of either of their attention. Nathaniel watches the adjustment with interest that doesn't feel like threat anymore, but isn't neutral either. It's the kind of attention people give when they're trying to understand the rules of a game that just changed. You're going to ask questions, he says, more statement than prediction. Carver doesn't respond to that. He doesn't acknowledge it at all, which is deliberate. Instead, he starts where the circumstances demand. You said it doesn't stop with you, he says. Explain that. Nathaniel considers the question for a moment, not avoiding it, just deciding how much to give. There are others, he says finally. Not dramatic, not evasive, just enough. How many? Carver asks. Nathaniel shakes his head slightly. That's not how it works. Then how does it work? A pause. They're not organized the way you're thinking, Nathaniel says. Not all of them. Some don't even know what they are. Carver leans forward slightly, adjusting the angle of the conversation. Start there, he says. People like you. How do they exist without knowing it? Nathaniel's eyes flick to me for a fraction of a second before returning to Carver. Because no one tells them, he says. Because nothing forces it until something does. Something like you, Carver says. Nathaniel doesn't deny it. Yes, he says, or someone else. My father shifts slightly at that, not interrupting, just absorbing. So, you somehow activate them, he says. Nathaniel looks at him. Sometimes, he replies, activation is not intentional. Nor is it expected. It just happens. That's the risk you take when you touch someone's psyche. Until now, I didn't believe it was possible. Carver doesn't let it sit. And the ones who know, he asks? The ones who are trained? Nathaniel's expression changes slightly at that word. Trained. They're different, he says. How? They have a better understanding of what is possible, Nathaniel replies, and less apt to make mistakes. That implies someone taught them, Carver says. Nathaniel doesn't answer right away. For the first time since we started, there's hesitation that doesn't feel like control. Not the way you're thinking, he says finally. Carver watches him closely. Then explain it so we're not thinking, he says. Nathaniel's jaw tightens slightly, a small tell that would have been invisible before, but now reads clearly without whatever used to sit behind it, smoothing those edges out. You haven't asked about him, Nathaniel says. The shift is immediate. Carver doesn't press harder, he adjusts. About who? He asks, though he already knows. Nathaniel looks past him for a second, not seeing anything in the room. The one who showed me how to hone my skill, he says quietly. The word hangs there. Not name, not title, just implication. Carver doesn't react outwardly, but I can feel the change in the room anyway. Your teacher, he says. Nathaniel doesn't confirm it. He doesn't have to. Chapter 6. The Teacher. The conversation slows after that, not because we're losing momentum, but because the ground under it has shifted. Up until now, everything Nathaniel has said could exist in isolation if you forced it to. An anomaly, a single case, something rare enough to contain without redefining the world around it. The moment he implies instruction, that possibility disappears. This isn't random. It isn't self-contained. It's learned. Carver doesn't rush the next question. He lets the silence stretch just enough to make it clear that we're not moving past it. Who is he? He asks finally. Nathaniel's reaction isn't fear. It's resistance. Not the kind you use to protect yourself, but the kind you use when something doesn't fit inside the framework you've built for yourself, and you don't know how to reconcile it. I don't know, he says. Carver doesn't accept that immediately. You just said he taught you, he replies. That implies more than a passing interaction. It wasn't like that, Nathaniel says. How was it then? Carver asks. Nathaniel leans back slightly, eyes narrowing as if he's trying to bring something into focus that won't stay still long enough to examine. He didn't introduce himself, he says. He didn't explain anything the way you're expecting. He showed me what I could do. Then he showed me what happens if I don't control it. There's something colder under that than anything he's said so far. Carver picks up on it. Consequences, he says. Nathaniel nods. Not threats, he adds. Outcomes. That distinction matters to him. To you, Carver says, or to other people? Nathaniel looks at him, and for a second, there's something like clarity in his expression. Both, he says. My father shifts again, arms folding across his chest now, settling into the posture he used when a witness stopped being unreliable and started being useful. And this teacher, he says, he's one of you? Nathaniel doesn't answer that directly. He's not like me, he says instead. That's not denial. It's separation. Carver leans into it. How's he different? He asks. Nathaniel's gaze drifts again, not to avoid the question, but because the answer doesn't sit in language the way ours do. He doesn't need proximity, he says finally. He doesn't need contact the way I did. Understanding the difference changes how the situation feels because of the sheer nature of the scale of risk this implies. Carver doesn't react outwardly, but I can feel him reassessing the situation. And where is he now? He asks. Nathaniel almost smiles again, but this time there's nothing behind it. You think he stays in one place? He says. Carver doesn't answer that. He doesn't need to. The implication is already there. This isn't just about finding someone. It's about understanding something that doesn't behave the way people do. Chapter 7. Experience of the unknown. The conversation pauses after that, not because we're done, but because there's a limit to how much can be processed at once before it stops being useful. Carver steps back first, not disengaging, just giving the space a chance to settle into something we can actually work with. Nathaniel doesn't push. He doesn't fill the silence. He just sits there, watching in a way that feels different now, less invasive, more observational. My father is the one who breaks it. I've seen pieces of this before, he says, not looking at Nathaniel, but not avoiding him either. That shifts the focus immediately. Carver turns slightly toward him. Explain, he says. My father nods once, organizing the thought as he speaks it. Cases that didn't line up, he says. People acting outside their own patterns without a clear cause. Statements that changed too cleanly. Not inconsistent, corrected. That word lands differently. Corrected how? I ask. Like someone had gone in after the fact and adjusted the narrative, he says. Not just what they said, what they believed happened. That aligns too closely with what we've seen to ignore. And those cases, Carver says, they stayed local? My father shakes his head. Some did, he says. Some didn't. The ones that didn't usually got pulled. Federal interest. No follow-up. No access after that. Carver's jaw tightens slightly at that. You remember any names? He asks. A few, my father says. Not enough to build a pattern on their own, but enough to know now that it wasn't isolated. He looks toward Nathaniel. You ever work any local law enforcement cases? He asks. Nathaniel doesn't hesitate. No, he says, but I know people who did. That's confirmation without detail. Carver steps back into it. Who? He asks. Nathaniel shakes his head. Doesn't work like that, he says again. Carver doesn't push harder this time, because we already have what we need from that answer. Chapter 8, The Lead. It takes longer to get something usable out of him after that. Not because he refuses, but because the shape of what he knows doesn't align cleanly with the way we ask questions. We're looking for familiarity and logic, but for something like this, there is none. Names, locations, hierarchy. He's giving us fragments of something that doesn't present itself that way unless you already understand it. The detective in my dad comes alive and quickly shifts our approach. He moves closer, not aggressive, not confrontational, just present in a way that forces attention. Right now, he says, you're the only person in this room who knows what's missing from this story. Nathaniel looks at him. And you're the only one who might understand what we're about to walk into, my father continues. Help us, or you become a problem no one knows how to solve. That doesn't end well for you. There's no threat in it, just reality. Nathaniel considers that longer than anything else we've asked. Then, finally, something changes. Not surrender, but decision. You're looking in the wrong place, he says. Carver leans in slightly. Then point us in the right one. Nathaniel exhales slowly. There's a program, he says. Or there was. I found it doing my own research into my nature while I had access at the Bureau. I no longer have the ability that Mara stripped from me, so I have no idea if and when the teacher could be listening in through me. If he knows how much I've said, it's not going to matter if you know what you're walking into or not. Something will most certainly be waiting. It's a risk we're willing to take, I say, although I'm not sure how to proceed knowing the scope of this so-called teacher's abilities. Now, what program? I ask. Nathaniel's eyes shift to me again. Meridian, he says. The word doesn't mean anything yet, but it will. Carver's expression tightens slightly. You've heard of it, Nathaniel says. Carver doesn't confirm or deny. What is it? He asks. Nathaniel shakes his head. Not what you think, he says. Not anymore. That's not an answer, Carver replies. It's the only one you're getting right now, Nathaniel says. A pause. Then, like he's deciding how much to risk, he adds one more piece. Start with a name, he says. Celine Ward. A change in landscape. Because names can be followed. Chapter 9. Movement. The decision to move happens without needing to be restated. We have something now. Not enough, but enough to justify what comes next. The mountain feels different when we step outside again, not because anything has changed, but because we have direction now, and direction reshapes uncertainty into something we can act on. Carver handles Nathaniel, securing him for transport with the same efficiency he's applied to everything else, adjusting for the injury without compromising control. My father checks the route, the vehicle, the timing, falling back into the kind of preparation that turns risk into something manageable. I stand there for a moment longer than I should, looking back at the cabin. It doesn't feel like a place we're leaving. It feels like a place that held something long enough for us to see it. Nathaniel pauses as we move him, not resisting, just looking at me again. You think you'll have all the answers when you get back, don't you? He says quietly. I don't reply, because I don't think that anymore. I know that the rabbit hole is deep, and it just opened up. We start down the mountain. The crushing weight of knowledge earned and the size of the unknown is dizzying, but we are a step closer than we were just hours ago. We're headed towards something, and somewhere on the road to get there, whether we understand it yet or not. Someone or something is already waiting.